Meghan raised holy fucking hell.
Bullying file this thick at Buckingham Palace.
Look, we've got to start with Meghan Markle. She's made her long-awaited appearance on MasterChef.
MasterChef Australia may not have simply edited Meghan Markle's episode. It may have tried to contain it. Because when viewers watched that appearance, they didn't just see a polished guest spot. They saw something stranger, an episode so carefully framed, so unusually flattering, and so determined to protect a single image that it raised a bigger question. What exactly needed that much protection? This was supposed to be a win. A major one. A globally recognized platform. A huge food audience. A kitchen setting perfectly aligned with the image Meghan has been trying to build. Warm, tasteful, elegant, domestic, elevated, effortless.
Surprise video call from her husband, Prince Harry. Have a look at
Everything
this.
is beautifully
We've had a
arranged.
phone call to studio.
Every ingredient has a story. Every table something. And every meal feels like a love
My
language.
husband's here.
On paper, MasterChef should have been the perfect stage for that. But the problem with stepping onto a stage like this is simple. Once the cameras roll, branding has to survive contact with reality. And reality asks inconvenient questions. Simple ones. Specific ones. The kind of questions that don't care how polished the introduction is. The kind of questions that can expose the distance between a public image and an actual performance in a matter of seconds. And that is exactly why this episode became so fascinating. Because the final broadcast didn't feel like effortless success. It felt at times like a rescue operation. Not because there was one massive collapse on camera. Not because there was one explosive disaster. But because there seemed to be dozens of tiny moments, small pauses, vague answers, strange choices, oddly staged beats, that kept pulling the episode away from authenticity and back toward control. And tonight, that is what we're breaking down. Not just what aired, but what the edit itself may have accidentally exposed. Because sometimes the cleanup job tells a bigger story than the mess. From the very beginning, the message was clear. This was not going to be framed as an ordinary guest appearance. This was presentation. This was positioning. This was image building on a premium stage. Meghan was not just treated like someone dropping in to enjoy the competition. She was framed as an important cultural figure entering the room with significance, prestige, and authority. The introduction, the language, the reactions, the music, everything seemed designed to elevate the moment before she had even said anything substantial. That matters. Because when a show works this hard to build someone up before the audience has had a chance to evaluate them naturally, it creates a kind of pressure. It invites scrutiny. It makes people look more closely. And once viewers start looking closely, every small hesitation becomes louder. Every vague phrase stands out more sharply. Every overly polished beat begins to feel less organic. That is the danger of overframing someone. If the performance that follows doesn't fully match the setup, the contrast becomes the story. And that contrast began almost immediately. Because the first truly revealing moment did not come from a hostile challenge, a technical test, or a difficult culinary question. It came from something so simple it should have been effortless. A warm, human, universal question. What is your favorite dish to cook for your family? That should have been the easiest answer of the entire episode. Not because there is one perfect answer, but because anyone who genuinely lives inside family cooking rhythms usually has one ready. A roast, a pasta dish, a soup, a curry, a tray bake. Something comforting, something familiar, something specific. Not necessarily fancy, just real. And that is what made the answer so striking. Because instead of landing on one clear dish, the response drifted. There were broad references to different preferences, different palates, different ingredients. It was all soft, descriptive, generalized. But the one thing the audience was waiting for, the actual dish, never really arrived. And that was the first crack. Not a scandal, not a collapse. Just a tiny but important mismatch between the image and the answer. Because viewers were not asking for perfection in that moment. They were asking for reality. Now, to be fair, not everyone has one single favorite thing they cook. Families are different. Homes are different. Routines are messy. That part is true. But that wasn't really the issue. The issue was that the response sounded more like branding language than lived experience. That distinction is everything. When someone talks naturally about cooking from real life, the answer usually has texture. It has memory. It has routine. It has that sense of, oh yes, this is the thing we always make because everybody likes it. Or this is the dish I do when I need something easy. Or this is the one my family asks for again and again.
It doesn't need to be big for a party.
It doesn't need to be sophisticated. It just needs to feel real. Instead, what viewers got felt abstract. Not false necessarily, but abstract. And in a kitchen environment, especially one as iconic as MasterChef, abstraction can feel like evasion. Because the whole point of that space is specificity. Ingredients, heat, timing, technique, flavor, texture, execution. A real kitchen asks you to land somewhere. It asks you to commit. And that is why this moment mattered more than it may seem at first glance. It wasn't just a missed answer. It was the first sign that, when the conversation moved from lifestyle image to practical food reality, the confidence seemed to soften.
Surprise video
That doesn't
call from her
automatically
husband, Prince
prove
Harry. Have a look at
anything
this.
dramatic, but it changes how the audience watches the rest of the episode. From that point on, viewers were no longer simply receiving
husband's
the
here.
performance. They were assessing it. And once that happens, every later moment gets filtered through a new question. Is this person actually comfortable here? Or is the episode working harder than the person is? One of the most revealing things about the entire episode was the repeated contrast between emotional, conceptual language and actual culinary substance. Meghan often sounded most comfortable when speaking in the language of story, mood, memory, and feeling. Food as connection. Food as care. Food as nostalgia. Food as beauty. Food as love language. And to be clear, there is nothing inherently wrong with that. In fact, food absolutely is emotional. It absolutely is cultural. It absolutely is personal. But on MasterChef, that is only one layer. This is not a lifestyle mood board. It is a competition kitchen. And in a competition kitchen, emotion has to be backed by execution. You can talk about a hero ingredient, but then you have to explain what it actually does on the plate. You can talk about meaning, but then you have to discuss balance. You can talk about memory, but then somebody still has to cook the dish properly under pressure. That is where the episode became awkward. Because again and again, it felt as though the language was floating above the food rather than getting into it. Beautiful words, safe words, elegant words, but often not the kind of words that make a viewer think, yes, this person deeply understands what is happening in this kitchen. And that contrast became even clearer because Meghan was not alone in the room. She was surrounded by people whose expertise was immediately visible. Real judges, real hosts, real culinary professionals. People who did not need a grand setup to establish authority, because their authority arrived naturally in the way they spoke. That's what made the gap feel sharper. Not because anyone had to say it out loud, but because television comparison is ruthless. The camera captures the room. The audience senses hierarchy. And expertise announces itself very quickly. When someone truly belongs in a space, They don't need the episode to keep reminding viewers who they are. The room does that for them. Then came another moment that many viewers saw as quietly revealing: the ingredient discussion and the carrot top pesto idea. On its own, carrot top pesto is not absurd. In fact, it's the kind of resourceful, waste-conscious idea that fits modern food culture very well. It sounds clever. It sounds fresh. It sounds environmentally aware. So the issue was not the idea itself. The issue was how the answer unfolded. Because instead of feeling crisp and decisive, it seemed to expand in several directions at once. Maybe with pasta, maybe with fish, maybe as this, maybe as that. The thought didn't land so much as drift. And in television, drift is dangerous. Especially when the show is clearly trying to present someone as composed and authoritative. A strong television answer has shape. It has confidence. It gives the audience a clear impression that the speaker knows exactly where they're going. This answer felt less like command and more like searching in real time. And the most telling part may have been the sense that others in the conversation helped stabilize the moment before it dissolved. That matters because it subtly shifts the power dynamic. The special guest is supposed to contribute insight. But when the room begins to support, complete, or rescue that insight, the guest stops looking like the center of expertise. And again, this is not about one devastating error. It is about accumulation. One vague answer,
You could do this with one
then
small
another
roll for your
soft
kids for
answer,
breakfast.
then a conceptual answer, then an answer that doesn't fully land. Eventually, the audience begins to notice the pattern.
Saturday morning.
And once a pattern
Being
is
able to be a
visible,
present
the
parent
image
and
starts
a-
wobbling. Another reason the episode triggered such strong reactions
could do a
is
little
that
dollop
it
of yogurt.
increasingly felt like the challenge was not merely happening in Meghan's presence. It felt organized around her. There is a
It
difference.
doesn't need to be big for a
A
party.
guest can be part of the energy of an episode without becoming its gravitational center. But here, the framing often pushed beyond inclusion and into glorification. The contestants weren't simply
Every day.
cooking in a MasterChef challenge. They seemed to be cooking for Meghan, around Meghan, toward Meghan, under Meghan's gaze, with Meghan as emotional destination. And after a while, that kind of framing starts to feel heavy. Not celebratory, heavy, because the competition itself already carries its own stakes. Contestants are fighting for survival, for recognition, for momentum, for opportunity. Their food should be the thing with the strongest emotional weight in the room. When that energy gets repeatedly redirected toward a guest, the balance can start to feel distorted. That distortion was one of the biggest problems in the episode. Not because celebrity guests can't be featured. Of course they can. But because the more insistently the show told viewers that Meghan mattered in this room, the more viewers seemed to ask whether she was actually earning that level of emphasis through what she contributed on camera. And for many critics, the answer was unclear. The words were big. The framing was big. The atmosphere was big. But the actual culinary authority still felt oddly elusive, which creates a very uncomfortable effect. It makes the presentation feel larger than the performance. And once that happens, the audience starts looking not at what the episode says, but at what the episode seems to be trying to persuade them to believe. Then came the moment that pushed the whole thing even further into produced territory, the FaceTime call from Prince Harry. Now let's be careful here. No one needs to claim secret knowledge to understand why that moment set off alarm bells. You don't have to know what happened behind the scenes. You just have to understand how television works. Sets are controlled spaces. Camera positions matter. Audio matters. Timing matters. Crew movement matters. Moments that look casual are often anything but. So when a personal call appears at exactly the right time, with cameras rolling, reactions ready, and the scene able to absorb it cleanly into the narrative, viewers naturally question the spontaneity. Was it possible that it was real? Yes. Did it feel random? To many viewers, absolutely not. And that feeling matters because the moment didn't simply add warmth. It changed the function of the scene. Suddenly, the focus was no longer kitchen confidence or culinary presence. It was status, association, recognition, spectacle, the appearance of the couple as a package. And that shift may have been the most revealing part of all. Because if the food credibility in the episode was not landing as strongly as hoped, then what better way to recenter the aura than to bring in the royal connection directly? Again, that may not prove intent, but it certainly created an impression. And the impression was this: when the culinary framing started looking thin, the celebrity machinery stepped in to thicken it. That is why the scene felt awkward to so many people. Not because a husband called, but because the call seemed to do narrative work. It rescued the atmosphere. It refreshed the glamour. It reminded the audience of the title-adjacent mystique. And it pulled attention away from the quieter problem that kept surfacing underneath, the performance in the kitchen itself. Then there was the time call sequence. And this was such a strange moment, because on paper it sounds harmless. In practice, though, it said a lot. Normally, time calls in a competition kitchen are functional, fast, clear, audible, efficient. The point is urgency. The point is to make sure everyone knows exactly where they are in the challenge. But here, what should have been a simple broadcast became a personal tour. Contestant to contestant. One by one. Soft delivery. Private feeling interaction. A routine production beat transformed into something stylized. Some people found it charming. Others found it absurd. But either way, it stood out. And it stood out because it didn't feel like the kitchen's needs were driving the moment. It felt like the guest's preferred mode of presentation was driving the moment. That's an important distinction. Because the more ordinary mechanics of the competition were reshaped to suit Meghan's vibe, the more the entire episode started to feel less like a normal MasterChef challenge, and more like a custom-built environment designed to flatter a single participant in the story. Even the simplest tasks seemed to require personalization.
Do a little dollop of yogurt.
Even the smallest announcements had to become a moment. And again, television viewers are sensitive to this. They know when something feels natural. They know when something feels overproduced. And they especially know when a show keeps stopping to admire a guest, rather than simply letting the guest function inside the format.
Every day.
That is what made this so uncomfortable. The format seemed to bend. And when a format bends too visibly, audiences stop trusting the performance inside it. One of the biggest challenges Meghan faced in this episode was not hostility. It was proximity. Proximity to people who clearly knew exactly what they were doing. Because the actual judges and experienced hosts did not need to speak in generalities. When they offered feedback, it had edge. It had precision. It had the texture of lived knowledge. They could talk about what was happening in the dish, why it worked, what heritage meant in that context, where balance was being achieved, where texture was missing, what the contestant was attempting, and how execution shaped the emotional result. That kind of commentary changes the air in a room. It sharpens everything. And once viewers heard that level of detail from professionals, the softer, safer language coming from Meghan became even more exposed. Not necessarily wrong. Not necessarily useless. But exposed. Because real expertise doesn't just sound nicer. It sounds clearer. It names things. It goes somewhere. It helps contestants improve. It gives the audience confidence that the speaker understands not just the aesthetics of food, but the mechanics of it. And that may have been the quiet disaster for the episode's intended framing. The more the real experts spoke, the harder it became to sustain the idea that Meghan naturally belonged at the same level of food authority the episode seemed eager to imply. No one had to confront her. No one had to embarrass her. The contrast did the work on its own. And contrast is merciless. Then there was the banana bread scene. On its face, it should have been one of the easiest wins in the whole episode. Warmth, recognition, a callback, a gift-like gesture, an easy opportunity for natural chemistry. Television loves moments like this because they are simple and human. No pressure, no technical trap, just taste, react, connect. And yet this moment ended up becoming one of the most replayed and closely examined parts of the appearance. Why? Because viewers sensed tension where the episode seemed to want delight. The reaction, at least to many people watching, didn't explode with easy warmth. Instead, it seemed more complicated, a little tighter, a little harder to read, not a scandal but enough to create curiosity. And that's how perception works on screen. When an episode feels unusually polished, people become hyper-attentive to micro-expressions. A delayed smile, a restrained face, a polite recovery, a moment that seems half a beat off. Suddenly, the audience starts asking questions the show never intended to raise. What was she actually feeling there? Was that genuine? Was something awkward being disguised in real time? Did the camera accidentally catch a version of the moment that the rest of the episode was working hard to smooth over? Of course, no one can read another person's mind from a facial expression. But perception is powerful. And the fact that this moment drew so much scrutiny tells you something important. Viewers did not fully trust the emotional surface of the episode by that point. Once trust weakens, every glance becomes evidence. And if even the edited version left room for that kind of interpretation, it only fuels speculation about what may have been left out. This is where all the backstage chatter becomes so combustible. Not because rumors automatically equal truth, they do not. But because the finished episode already feels defensive enough to make people believe that some version of tension is plausible. That is the key point. If the broadcast had felt easy, natural, relaxed, and undeniably successful, then the rumors would have had far less oxygen. They would have bounced off the surface. But when the broadcast itself already contains strange tonal shifts, suspiciously convenient moments, visible overpraise, soft questions, and repeated attempts to elevate someone whose practical authority remains blurry, the public becomes far more willing to imagine additional friction off camera. That does not prove the rumors. It explains why they stick. Reports and commentary about words being changed, introductions being softened, reactions being managed, or backstage feelings being bruised become more interesting when the episode in front of us already looks like a carefully arranged patch job. And that is why the missing footage matters so much in public imagination. Because the final cut does not feel like pure triumph. It feels edited with purpose. It feels like an episode trying to preserve an image while still having to work around the material it captured. That is a very different energy from a straightforward celebrity guest success story. And audiences can feel the difference. At the heart of all this is a much bigger issue than one awkward episode. This appearance mattered because it was never just about television. It was about validation. The larger business image around Meghan relies heavily on a particular kind of credibility. Taste, home, hosting, care, curation, domestic beauty, thoughtful ingredients, elevated simplicity. That world only works if the audience believes the person at the center of it feels authentic. Not perfect, not Michelin level, but real. And MasterChef could have been the ideal place to reinforce that. It could have shown her stepping naturally into a food-adjacent space and seeming comfortable enough that the audience stopped questioning the premise. Instead, for many critics, it did the opposite. It sharpened the questions. Because when the opportunity arrived to demonstrate practical ease in the kitchen, what viewers often saw instead was controlled language, careful presentation, conceptual vagueness, and a production environment that seemed to compensate wherever natural authority didn't fully appear. That is a problem if your brand depends on being seen as convincing in exactly that space. A lifestyle image can survive a bad review. It can survive mockery. It can survive backlash. But it struggles when people stop believing in the underlying authenticity. And this episode, fair or unfair, gave skeptics new material for exactly that reason. Not because it exposed some huge hidden truth in one dramatic reveal, but because it showed how much framing may be required to hold the image upright. And once the audience begins to notice the scaffolding, they stop admiring the house. They start inspecting the supports. Another fascinating thing about the episode is how often the safest possible answer turned out to be the most revealing. Diplomatic answers, pleasant answers, broad answers, non-committal answers, answers designed to avoid risk. Normally, that kind of media training can be very effective. It keeps the tone smooth. It reduces the chance of clipping. It avoids controversy. It makes everything look polished. But in a kitchen competition, safety can backfire. Because cooking is not abstract. Food is concrete. You can't really sell culinary confidence while hovering permanently above detail. At some point, viewers need to feel the ground under your language. They need to hear something that sounds like instinct. They need to see a preference, a judgment, a point of view, a crisp thought, a natural specificity that doesn't feel rehearsed or overmanaged. When that never quite arrives, the whole appearance can start to feel like someone playing the role of a food person rather than simply being one. That may sound harsh, but it is precisely why the episode hit such a nerve. People can forgive imperfection. They struggle more with performance that feels too conscious of itself. And this appearance often felt intensely conscious of itself. As if every line had to support a larger image. As if every moment had to remain elegant. As if nothing could be too raw, too direct, too messy, too technically exposed. But real kitchens are messy. Real confidence can survive specifics. And real expertise usually gets stronger, not weaker, when the conversation becomes concrete.
If we must.
That is why the safest answers didn't protect the image. They may have weakened it. By the time the episode ended, the cumulative effect was hard to ignore. The flattering music,
It makes the morning
the oversized praise, the high-status
You could do
framing,
this with one small row
the
for your kids for
conceptual
breakfast.
answers, the practical thinness, the personal time calls, the too convenient FaceTime interruption, the over-centered challenge design,
Being able to
the
be a
moments
present
where
parent.
actual
And it's a
experts seem to carry the substance. Put all of that together, and the
could do a
final
little
result
dollop of
no
yogurt.
longer feels effortless. It feels managed. That is the word that hangs over the whole thing. Managed,
It doesn't need to
managed
be big
energy.
for a party.
managed reactions, managed authority, managed warmth, managed spontaneity, managed importance. And once a viewer starts reading the
Every day.
episode through that lens, the entire experience changes. The smiles look more deliberate. The applause sounds more functional. The praise feels less organic. The staging feels more visible. The image begins to look less like natural charisma and more like something constantly being maintained. That is why so many critics ended up using the language of damage control, patching, or rescue. Not because the final product was a total collapse, but because it seemed to require so much visible assistance to keep landing as a success. And that is the ultimate irony. The more the episode appears to protect Meghan, the more it invites viewers to wonder what exactly required protection in the first place. Sometimes polish is so heavy that it stops hiding the cracks. Sometimes it outlines them. What makes this episode fascinating beyond celebrity gossip is that it exposes a larger truth about modern image making. An image can be built in controlled environments. It can thrive in stylized photos, in elegant captions, in curated interviews, in soft-focus branding, in short-form clips that only reveal what they want to reveal. But reality-based formats are more dangerous, especially formats built around skill, pressure, and direct interaction with people who actually inhabit the field. Because in those environments, image has to do more than look good. It has to hold up. That doesn't mean the person must be perfect. It just means the performance has to feel unforced. And what many viewers responded to in this episode was not just awkwardness. It was effort. The visible effort of maintaining a highly polished identity in a setting that kept demanding something firmer underneath it. That is what made the whole thing so uncomfortable. And that is also what made it so memorable. Because audiences are deeply attuned to authenticity. They may not always agree with each other, but they know when something feels natural and when it feels labored. And this, for a lot of people, felt labored. Beautifully dressed, carefully lit, generously scored, lovingly edited, but labored. And in television, labor is dangerous when the role you're playing is effortless. Did MasterChef Australia protect Meghan Markle? Maybe. But if it did, it may also have exposed the problem more clearly than anyone intended. Because the final edit still left in enough hesitation, enough vagueness, enough overmanagement, and enough suspiciously polished moments to make viewers question not just what they were seeing, but what they weren't seeing. This episode was supposed to strengthen a narrative. It was supposed to support the image of Meghan as a credible, elegant, food-end hosting presence, a woman naturally at home in this world, a figure whose lifestyle branding could slide smoothly into a major culinary platform without resistance. Instead, the resistance became the story. Not open conflict, not explosive failure, something subtler, a persistent mismatch between the scale of the presentation and the force of the performance. And that mismatch is exactly why the episode continues to generate so much discussion. Because when a show tries this hard to convince you of someone's authority and you still come away unsure, the uncertainty becomes louder than the praise. And that may be the most damaging outcome of all. The final broadcast did not look like easy confidence. It looked like confidence under maintenance. It looked like an image being held in place. And once viewers feel that, they rarely unsee it. So maybe the real question is whether the episode was flattering. Maybe the real question is this. If this was the cleaned-up version, what did the raw version look like? And more importantly, did the edit save the image? Or did it accidentally reveal how much saving it needed? What do you think? Did the final cut successfully protect Meghan's image?
If we must.
Or did the polishing make the whole thing feel even more controlled? Did the episode prove she belongs in that world? Or did it expose the limits of the performance?
Genuinely.
Let me know
and
in the
it makes
comments.
the morning a lot more fun.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, like the
You could do
video,
this with one small
subscribe,
row for your kids
and
for
share it with
breakfast.
someone who noticed the same strange energy in that MasterChef appearance. Because sometimes the most revealing moment in television isn't what they leave in. It's what the edit tells you they were afraid to leave untouched.